In this video, we're going to look at the economic activities of the first occupants. We're going to see how the environment played a role in how the Aboriginals traded their goods, and we're also going to have our first look at the interactions between the first occupants and the Europeans. So today, if you want something, you go out and buy it. Or at your age, you either buy it with your allowance, your parents buy it for you, or you go out and get a part-time job. Well, the first occupants didn't have money the way we understand it. The things that they wanted, they traded for. Now, trade without money is called barter, and it was essential to the way of life of the first occupants. It's similar to how when you guys were in elementary school and you sat down at lunchtime, somebody had a juice box, you had Jolly Ranchers, you wanted his juice, you guys would trade, there'd be no money involved. That's a kind of barter. It's similar to what the first occupants did. Now, we saw how the first occupants were spread out all over North America. So without trucks or cars, how did they bring their goods to trade? Well, they used waterways. So Tadoussac was actually a very important trading location, and it was made that way because the waterways made it a available location to trade. So the St. Lawrence River and the Saguenay River met, and it was a good place to come up the river with your canoe. So Tadoussac was a very important meeting place. Another important meeting location was where the St. Lawrence River and the Ottawa River meet. So this was another place where it was safe for canoes, and thus a good location to go and trade. So what do we need to remember? Well, the first occupants traded all kinds of stuff. Really whatever they had too much of, whether it was corn, meat, shells, or whatever. The main method for trade was through their lifestyle. So they traded what they hunted, gathered, fished, or farmed. So today, if you need a new pot, you go out and buy one. So this wasn't an option for the first occupants. All their tools, their weapons, their houses, their clothes, everything had to be made by hand. That's why natural resources were important. Minerals were essential for the hunting and agriculture of the first occupants. So stone was used for weapons and tools. Earth was used for clay pots, pipes, and vases. If you wanted meat, you would trade with an Algonquin group. If you needed vegetables, you would trade with an Iroquois group. Trade was also a way of creating alliances among the first occupants. Even today, one of the reasons why Canada and the US are such good friends is because they have a trade agreement. Trade has allowed them to become allies. So we saw in the way that the First Nations lived that they adapted to their environment. They used the rivers that were safe for canoes so that they could exchange their surplus food and tools with other tribes. The Ottawa River was used by the Algonquins to bring their furs and meat, while further up, the Saguenay River was used by the Innu, your Tadoussac, to bring their furs as well. The first occupants made sure to settle in places that had plenty of food and other resources so that they would be able to survive. Now we saw how the Iroquois survived through farming and some hunting. The fact that they were able to farm allowed them to live a sedentary lifestyle. We also saw how women were pretty boss in the tribe. Because they were responsible for farming, and thus the food, and thus the survival of the Aboriginal people in the group, they were a matriarchal society. So the Huron, who were part of the Iroquoian linguistic group, were matriarchal. But what about the Algonquin? Who was responsible for food in their groups? Well, if we look like a tribe like the Malecite, they survived by hunting. They needed to follow the movement or migration of the animals, and this made them nomadic. That's why their wigwams were easy to take down. And since we said the men were responsible for the hunting, and they are the ones that brought in the food, the Malecite were a patriarchal society. So a student a few years ago taught me the best way to remember what each of the first occupant groups did. So Miss Panpin. So this little trick will help you guys remember what each group did every time. So we have M for matriarchal, I for Iroquoian, and S for sedentary. So that's your Miss. For Pan, we have patriarchal, Algonquian, and nomadic. And for Pin, we have patriarchal, Inuit, and nomadic. So this should actually help you guys remember what each of the first occupants groups did. So what brought the Europeans to North America in the 1500s? Well, that depends on who you're asking. The French Normans and the Bretons, who came from areas in France, came for cod. In fact, there was so much fish in the St. Lawrence River that boats had a hard time moving, and you actually didn't even need nets. You could drop a bucket in the water and pull out a whole bunch of fish. Another group that came to North America were the Basque. Their land lies between Spain and France, and they came for whale oil, which was used for makeup, soap, paint, and oil lamps. Today, the site of the Red Bay Coast off Labrador is now a UNESCO World Heritage Site. This was actually where the Basque did most of their whaling. So this is actually a whaling boat that was found in the water. So because of this, it has been decided that this area deserves to be protected because it is pretty much essential to understanding how Europeans first came to North America. So the first meeting was bound to happen. The Europeans would try their fish on the shores of the Gulf of the St. Lawrence River, and when doing this, the first occupants saw them. Eventually, they started trying to communicate with one another. This meeting changed the history of North America forever. So what happened when the Europeans and the First Nations met? Well, they started trading. It turned out that the Europeans found the fur from the animals that the Aboriginals hunted quite valuable. And in exchange, the Aboriginals got knives, pots, beads, and weapons. So look at this Micmac from the last video. Now look at this Amerindian. Look how the contact with the Europeans have changed his lifestyle. He has an axe made of metal, different types of beads, and a rifle. That's a lot of change in a short time. That type of change would be the equivalent from going from an Australian Aboriginal bull roarer, which is sort of like a really, really old cell phone, to the iPhone in one day.
Touchdown every morning.
So what do we need to know? Europeans came to the New World for cod and whale oil. They ended up meeting one another, so the Europeans and Aboriginals met on the Gulf of the shores of the St. Lawrence River, and that meeting resulted in the Aboriginals exchanging their furs for European goods like knives, metal pots, pans, beads, and weapons. And a big change happened to the way the Aboriginals hunted. Before, they just hunted for food. Now they started hunting for the fur so that they could get more European products. And these products would now become sort of spread among the first occupants. So the meeting of these two groups would have an impact so great that neither the Europeans nor the first occupants knew what was going to come next. In fact, their interactions in the 1500s has continued to have an effect on the lives of Canadians and First Nations peoples living in Canada to this very day. So I hope this video helps you guys study, and that's it. Take care. See you guys next time.